because I'm asking a very, very simple question. What does the Prime Minister have to do to prove he's on the side of motorists? A lot of you are saying, actually, a lot of this is down to the simple thing of doing something rather than saying something and having a review of it. Let's put that question to former Conservative Party leader, Sir Iain Duncan Smith. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you very much. What does he have to do to prove he's on the side of motorists?
Well, I think all the things that he's announced so far are I'm very happy with, particularly in London, as I'm a London MP. I think the whole Ulez issue is a disaster in the sense that we should do our level best to make sure it never comes in. I mean, my area is a blue area. It doesn't have environmental issues, but it's going to completely hamstring people who have bought their last car before retirement, and for that matter, who may be coming in to do business. I heard one of the advisors to the mayor say, when he was told that plumbers and electricians and others coming in from outside London to do business wouldn't be able to come in properly because of their cars, etc. And he said, well, they should go on the tube. I don't know what he knows about plumbing and electrical work that he thinks doesn't require a van.
This is it. This is what people, we had a caller in about this as well, and loads of tweets. People saying that these policies are being made by people who just don't live in the real world. Oh, just go and buy a new electric vehicle. I mean, even if you could charge it. I've got a charging point put outside outside my home by Camden Council. I'm sure they did it deliberately. It was there for about 6 months, stopped working, hasn't been mended since. I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Look, we've got these meetings, got meetings with the energy industry leaders this week. The Prime Minister looking at how to achieve the energy security plan. He's going to be stressing, Scotland's role in this, and North Sea oil drilling and gas exploration, hundreds of new licences. But that is good news. But we are still way behind on having enough energy in even 5 years' time, let alone by 2030, when we're supposed to have a ban on the sale of new diesel and petrol cars. By the way, the EU and the US have moved it to 2035. I'm hoping it never comes in. But we don't have enough energy, electricity specifically, for the needs we have now, let alone the needs of millions of electric vehicles. We don't have the charging points. We don't have the actual electricity producing grid to do it. I mean, the government must know this, and yet they're still pursuing this policy.
Yeah, I mean, there are some interesting points you make here, Julia. I just want to sort of bring them down to what I hope people will understand in terms of cost to them. The OBR itself has forecast that our drive towards net zero at the rate it's going will add 21% to our national debt. 21%. That's close to a quarter more of our national debt as a result of this drive. The second thing that's interesting is that compared to the United States, where the USA has been, for all the talk of Biden on the green stuff, and we always report what he says, never what he does. Yep. In fact, they are drilling more shale gas than ever before. They're exporting it for the first time in form of liquid gas. Their electricity costs per kilowatt hour, which is how it's charged, are essentially 2.5 times lower than ours. So wow. Each household will be paying something like £23 more in the UK per kilowatt hour for electricity because we have failed to get our energy sources right. And with all this talk of net zero, etc., but electrical power is at the stage very expensive. So the reality for most of the households in this country, if we were living in the USA, we would be much better off because they have lower cost. Why? Because they're using carbon-rich fuel sources to get their costs down. And we should be doing the same thing to make sure we transition to net zero at a pace that we can afford and in a way that doesn't destroy our industry. If we go to net zero diesel and petrol cars by 2030, we'll be the only developed country doing that. Everyone else, as you said, moved to 2035. Yeah. Our car industry simply won't make it. China is ready to flood us with cheap electric cars. Every battery car company in China is now a car company, and they are going to flood the UK first with cheap cars. That'll drive our industry out of the game. It will make sure the jobs aren't here, and we will then become dependent. And worse than that, they can flick a switch anytime they like, and most of our cars will stop. So this is the key point I want to make. We've got to balance all of this to make sure we do it properly, not beggaring everybody and not being holier than, more Catholic than the Pope when it comes to 2030.
This whole world leadership thing, I mean, people just do not care. I mean, I thought it was fascinating. The former Chancellor, Philip Hammond, under Theresa May, not a man for whom I think you and I agree on many issues, but certainly over Brexit, he says that Tory Prime Ministers, Theresa May onwards, have been, in his words, systematically dishonest about the true £1 trillion plus cost of net zero. We know the Treasury did some vague working out. We're always told, I mean, for years we were told, ahead of that 90-minute debate, to vote for the net zero by 2050 policy, which is legally binding on the government. By the way, your government does actually have a majority. They could overturn that today if they wanted to. People have been told, oh, it's going to save us money. It's going to have 500,000 new jobs. It's going to be brilliant. It's going to bring energy security, reliability. It's the opposite of all those things. Right now, unless there is some major technological innovation of which we are not aware right now, it's going to be the opposite of all those things. It is time that we know that.
You're right. And I think the problem we've got now is we've kind of almost globally now bought into this net zero religion. Yep. Now, we must clean up our atmosphere. We must get the carbon levels out and down. But remember, the UK at the moment is less than 1% of net emissions. And here's the other thing. Nobody bats an eyelid by the fact that we buy in now oil and gas from pretty dodgy regimes, yep, and they have to bear the cost of the carbon target on their heads. We use the gas and oil, but we manage not to have to declare the carbon target. So this is an hypocrisy, really, amongst politicians. And I have to tell you, it's not just the case of the government. I think Rishi Sunak is now moving in the right direction. I applaud him for it. But the truth is, politics itself has failed to interrogate and to declare the real costs to people. Yep. People know that their cost of living is rising, but a very significant chunk of that is down to the fact that we're having to pay huge subsidies and huge extra costs because we ceased to dig oil and gas out of our own oil fields, and we've paid more for it. And the result is that this is a problem for net consumers. So let's get practicality back into politics so that we actually debate these things on the basis of how do we do it? How do we do it without destroying jobs and livelihoods and making the cost of living higher and increasing, as the OBR says, our net debt?
Yeah, indeed. I've always said, once people are actually aware of the cost, I was asking, Lib Dems and Greens who were talking about this, it's a great policy, how much is it going to cost and who's going to pay it? Oh, well, it won't cost anyone anything because the government will fund it. Like, OK, so taxpayers will pay it. There's always a cost to these things and everyone's been very dishonest about it. Can I ask you about a couple of other topics as well? Let's talk about this migrant barge, the Bibi Stockholm barge. It's in Portland, the Port of Portland in Dorset. It's still not in use. We're told now it could be a fire risk, it could be another Grenfell because of the fire risk of this barge. Is that just over-exaggeration? Is this the human rights lawyers getting in their knickers in a twist again? Or is there a reasonable concern? We need to know that people are in safe, humane conditions.
Well, of course we do, and I don't suppose that the government will in any way attempt to do something that doesn't fit within the normal health and safety requirements they have, and also the fire risk hazards. Those will all have to be inspected, and if they're passed, then it's capable for use. I must say that that there is constantly peculiar, again, rather like the net zero target, language that sounds ridiculous at times. I mean, the point the government's trying to do right now, and I understand it, I have some issues myself on their recent law that they passed, but not particularly over the disincentives. The key thing is to tell those poor people living and working elsewhere, and particularly those stranded in Calais, that coming to the UK is not an option illegally, that you have to do it legally because it's dangerous and you're paying criminals to be able to provide the boats for you. And that is the key issue we've got to try and stop. And to do that, you've got to make it clear to everybody that this won't be a case of coming over here and then just disappearing into the country to get a job. It's actually going to be not very helpful to you to come over here because you'll be in a place like this barge.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to work on the black market. Times against us, I just want to ask you just another topic quickly. Nigel Farage has launched his victims website for those who've been debanked like him or threatened with debanking. We now think it's in the tens of thousands of people who've been debanked. There's a lot of pressure on the NatWest board, including the chairman, Sir Howard Davies, after the chief executive of NatWest, of course, who own Coots, who debanked Nigel Farage, charge, Dame Alison Rose. She was forced to resign. As far as I'm concerned, she shouldn't get a payoff. She should have been sacked. Do you think the NatWest board should still be in place, given that only hours before she was forced to fall on her sword, they backed her despite knowing she had committed what would undoubtedly be gross misconduct if any other member of the banking staff had done what she did, divulging details of an individual client's banking situation?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I note that the Chancellor failed to give her his full support. I rather agreed with him when he was asked. The reality is that this is not just a NatWest scandal, though I have to say, had an individual who wasn't earning £5 million a year and the head of the bank had made a transgression and committed an offence like she did and owned up to it eventually, they would, of course, been out on their ear pretty quickly. So I just wonder whether or not what's good for the sauce for the goose is not for the gander, if you know what I mean. The main thing here, though, is a group of us just written to the Chancellor to say to him, this isn't just NatWest, it isn't just individual banks. What we've got here is a failure, I think, of the regulator, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, because in a way they have actually left the definition of what a politically exposed person is. It's meant to be about financial links. It's got nothing to do with their beliefs. But they've also been adding to that this whole idea that somehow banks need to be more in touch with other elements rather than just financial issues. And of course, that is pushed the banks in a way, happily, it appears to many of them, to go down the direction where they can judge what people believe in and therefore decide whether they don't give them bank accounts. I hardly know of anybody who hasn't had a problem in politics with mortgages being cancelled and with their bank accounts being cancelled. It is clear that there are many, many people that these banks are judging on what they believe, virtue signalling to all the minority groups. It's time it stopped and we returned banking back to what it should be. After all, when I was at the DWP, I made and tried to get everybody on a bank account because it's much easier for them, it's more certain, the payments are better, and they're able to save better and understand their money flows. We did all of that, only to find now that at any stage the banks could just off them because
just close them. Exactly. I mean, this is the thing. It's as fundamental as water and electricity, isn't it?